honestly. I'm going to go ahead and call this regular Assembly Committee on Homelessness to order. If we could go ahead and quiet down so we could get started, please. We'll go ahead and start with introductions. Thank you. Starting with Mr. Training, going around the table.
Suzanne LaFran.
Felix Rivera.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Nancy Burke.
Christopher Thompson.
Steve Ashman.
All right, thank you. Before we get started on our regular business, just when I make the same comments that I make at every assembly meeting, that this topic is tough and emotional. I would like for everyone to keep our comments constructive and insightful and about the issues. We have a lot to do today. I want to make sure that we get as much audience participation as we possibly can. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Burke.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, you're good. I can just speak up if she doesn't understand this one.
Is this better?
Yeah, that's better.
And I know this is going to be a challenge, but we've heard consistently from members in the audience that it's hard to hear us. This table kind of makes us talk to each other, and so if you can use the mic, I know that's going to be a challenge, but if we wouldn't mind doing that for today. So the meeting, the first item on the agenda is the alcohol tax, and of course this body approved the tax and understands the structure, but there have been questions in the community and from members about what would we do with this revenue if we had it. So the chair has asked that we structure the agenda today to reflect activities that would be funded or increased under an alcohol tax if there was a reliable, consistent funding stream for the work that's been discussed in this committee over the last really 5 years. And so you'll see from the agenda that some but not all of the topics are covered. There are other things that the community would think of, or the assembly would think of, or the administration would like to do, but these are the places that have been concretely discussed in this committee around the need for more revenue, more commitment, and resources for us to be successful as a community. On the table, there are handouts that have been distributed at community councils. We've met with a large number of community councils and Rotary, other groups who've requested meetings on the alcohol tax, and you'll see the materials that we've been distributing. Many of you I've been on the community council circuit with, and so you've kind of seen our messaging out in the community. And so today we wanted to talk about what we would do with it. And so with that, I will, unless there are questions, Mr. Chair?
I don't see any questions, but I just want to add an additional comment that the second topic that I wanted to make sure we addressed, because it is rather timely, is the 2019 summer plan for camp outreach and abatement, and that is on the agenda at the end of our agenda. So a lot of topics to get to today.
Yes, so we'll try to be actively facilitating this meeting and keeping everyone on the time frame, and I will, in that spirit, turn it over to Steve Ashman from the Anchorage Health Department.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about the activities that we have that we've been performing in relationship to the Alaska Treatment Center, and that's the rebuild of the Cliff Road Substance Abuse Treatment Center that is scheduled to close in June of this year. We received a $5 million capital grant from the state of Alaska, which they've currently extended. Let me put this on here. Which they've currently extended $374,000 to us in the first allocation. We've not expended all of those dollars yet primarily because we were waiting for certain things for the state on some Medicaid programs that they were putting together. But we do have some preliminary information. We, through our discussions with our partners providing services now, the state of Alaska, consultants that we have hired to help us put together a plan, we've put together a facility that's going to have 3 different programs on it. The first one would be outpatient treatment. That would have a capacity of 35 individuals with a length of stay about 60 days. The next one is the residential treatment program. That would open up in the second year, and the program capacity would have 18 individuals to be 9 double occupancy rooms, and they would be providing a level of care of 3.3 level of care, and that is homeless individuals with substance abuse disorders, co-occurring mental health programs, and cognitive impairments. That is a level of care that's currently not being provided anywhere in the state right now. Length of stay would be 90 days. And then the next one is ambulatory withdrawal management with a capacity of 8 individuals. The length of stay would be about 15 days. And then transitional housing services, we have transitional housing there for up to 44 individuals who have completed the residential treatment and would stay there until they finish some outpatient treatment, as well as get themselves in order to go into private sector or subsidized housing. We've completed initial site analysis on the property. The first thing we have to look at is legal and physical access to the property. There is not legal access to the current Clitheroe property right now. A piece of that is owned by the airport, so we'll be talking with the airport on getting some right-of-ways associated with that. We have some off-site improvements that needs to be made. During a preliminary traffic study, we're trying to determine whether or not the road would be an urban and rural road, and there's a significant difference in funding cost associated with what that determination is. I believe, and our consultants believe, that we could get a rural designation because they project less than 100 vehicles would be going through there per day. Over 100 would be in more of an urban road. But we'll know more once we do a traffic study associated with that. But the difference in cost would be the road would be $9.9 million if it's an urban road and $900,000 if it's a rural road. So it's pretty significant. We will also have water and sewer availability up to AWW owns 16-inch pipe up to the intersection of the West End Road. And we have a sewer lift all the way up to Clitheroe. But we would have to look at moving the water line, extending the water line 4,100 feet. We have a conceptual cost estimates for infrastructure. If we are able to go with the rural road, the cost of that would be $2.8 million. Urban road will be $11.8 million. Road construction, construction costs, total buildings for all of the buildings, it's about 40,000 square foot. Total construction costs would be $17.9 million for a total cost of $20,750 if it's a rural road. If it's an urban road, it's $29,750. There are some decision breaking points for us, of course. We are in the final phases of feasibility study. South Central Foundation is conducting a feasibility analysis based on the number of clients and the types of services that will be providing staffing levels and things like that. I don't have a final on that yet, but and Nancy might need to help me out here, but I think when we're sustaining occupancy, we still have a deficit of about $550,000 a year, which the municipality is projected to, we're projecting the municipality would help fund that operating deficit. We still don't know what's going on. There are some changes with current legislation and Medicaid that could change things for us, so we're keeping an eye on that. We're depending upon the state receiving 1115 demonstration waivers of Medicaid services. That has not been approved by the federal government yet. So we'll have to wait. I think it's projected to be June or July if we might know something. And then, of course, one of the other items that would break the deal would be, of course, if the bond did not pass, because that would be the source that we'd be using to fund the facility.
All right, so I have a couple of questions. First, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the $500,000 deficit you were talking about, would that be if the alcohol tax bond passes, or is that not?
Well, we wouldn't have any deficit if the bond fails because we wouldn't have a project. If it passes, we expect it to be $500,000 per year to operate that this municipality would have to provide some operating capital. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Did you say that we were going to take up the additional information on alcohol tax uses after this? Because that was A on the agenda, and I want us to have a time to discuss this handout specifically at some point. Is that when will we do that? Because this is the first time I've seen this.
Sure. So I will turn to Ms. Berg, see if she has a plan to discuss this particular handout. I know that the plan today was to just go over a few different items, which is B through E, of different areas that could be expanded upon if the alcohol tax were to pass.
Can I speak to this then before we go through the specifics on these programs?
Sure.
So I appreciate that the mayor's office put this together, and I think I can project. And for those maybe can see it over there. Now I know obviously we can't do any of this without the alcohol tax passing, but it's also the case it's the assembly that sets the budget, right? So this is a proposal. This is not necessarily what it's going to look like at all. In fact, I'm just looking at this right now. This is not what I would prefer. The money directly for housing programs, I would want that to be a much more significant portion of this budget, maybe 2 or 3 times. I mean, if you do the back of the envelope math, if we have roughly 1,000 people homeless, and it costs $750 or something along those lines to have a unit, then that's $9 million a year. So we could theoretically do that too. And the thinking is, if you house everyone, then some of these other things like the crisis response the need for that would go down very significantly. So I just wanted to sort of get that out there to make sure that we understand that there isn't any path dependency with this proposal. That it's useful to give an idea for folks of what this could be spent on. But again, this is not how I would advocate for these funds being allocated. And when it ultimately comes down to it, it's the assembly that's going to make that decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And I agree with that assessment. It is going to be the assembly, but as you have probably heard, and I've heard from constituents, their biggest concern is what exactly is this going to be spent on. So I want to thank the Mayor's Office and Ms. Berg for putting this together to give some ideas of what this potentially could be spent on.
Yeah, absolutely. I know why they did it, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to sort of set the goalposts or make sure that people understand that this is only preliminary. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any other questions on the Alaska Center for Treatment update?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry I didn't text in, but I would just concur with what Mr. Dunbar just said.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Mr. Chair, there's a picture. This is a very initial drawing of a conceptual of how this building may be positioned on the property, and it's helpful sometimes for people to see a picture. I would put a ton of caveats around this, that as funding becomes more solid and the service delivery, as Mr. Ashman spoke to it, there could be some big changes that happen. But this is something that, given the assumptions we've worked with today, could potentially be what the facility looks like.
And pretend you see solar panels everywhere that there's ground.
Yeah, solar panels are definitely there. be a greenhouse behind it. Okay.
Thank you.
I think, in the spirit of I think what Assemblymember Dunbar said sums up the community discussion and, just a lot of heart and soul and passion in the community about how do we manage the today problem while solving for tomorrow's problem. And so the agenda, we're trying to show some of each of those, but it is exactly correct that I'm assuming if the alcohol tax passes, the administration and an assembly would immediately begin putting together some mechanism to sift through the important decisions that need to be made. Okay, so next up we have...
Actually, Ms. Burke, I have a question from Mr. Trainee.
Ms. Burke, I think if you look at the governor's proposed budget, the need for this alcohol tax becomes just paramount, because I see a cut in all social service programs we've got. And if Anchorage doesn't have this tax, it's going to make this entire process just really worse. For the citizens out there that desperately need this sort of a treatment facility to get unhooked from alcohol. So I appreciate your effort in this. It'll be up to the assembly, though, to determine where the money's being spent, as with anything else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Burke.
Thank you. So on this agenda, we've had two projects that are listed here, HUD demonstration housing programs in the community, and these projects take a number of years to develop and ensure that they're correct. And so the first one is the Pay for Success project, and we have Jake Seagull, who's here from Social Finance. I'm going to turn the mic over to him, but first I'll cue up the next one. Jasmine Khan will be coming up to talk about the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, I believe with Allison Kerr from Covenant House. And then Jasmine's just going to give you just a snippet about the other housing efforts that are moving in the community. And this agenda also sort of tracks the pillars that are under our community plan, the Anchored Home Plan. And just to put a plug in for that, the next community update on the Anchored Home Plan, where we'll cover more of the materials that are reporting out on things happening under that plan. It will be, unfortunately, right over an assembly meeting. It'll be April 9th from 5:30 to 7:30 at the Weldon Marston Theater. So we will make sure it's reported and provide that information to assembly members.
Morning all, thanks for having me. My name is Jake Siegel. I'm Vice President with Social Finance. I've spoken before you back in 2018. In the spirit of a packed agenda, I'll try to be brief. My organization is a nonprofit that works with jurisdictions around the country to set up Pay for Success projects, which, as I mentioned previously, are public-private partnerships in which we essentially set up contracts in which jurisdictions can pay for outcomes versus paying for services. And to do that, we have a relatively intensive set of conversations about exactly how we would define those outcomes, how we would evaluate them, and how different jurisdictions would work together to pay for them. This process has been in place here for just over a year and a half now in Anchorage. The United Way and the municipality worked together to win a grant from the HUD and Department of Justice to put together a Pay for Success project. And that funding worked not just to help create a feasibility study here, but also to support some initial efforts at evaluation design, and we'll set aside some money for positive outcomes payments that comes through the federal government. We've been working over the last year pretty intently to help put together the basics of what a Pay for Success project here would look like in terms of expanding access to permanent supportive housing for the most vulnerable folks among our homeless community. The couple of updates I wanted to call out here. We've been working pretty intently on the evaluation design component of this, along with folks from UAA and from another evaluation firm called NPC down in Portland, to identify exactly what are the metrics we want to evaluate and how we would, the methodology underlying how we would evaluate them throughout the course of the project. In order to support that, we've also been working through data sharing agreements among the many different folks who would be involved in this kind of a project, including those who are working with the HMIS system, those in corrections, and those that have access to health data to understand how we can actually track progress for the folks who we survey. the thing that is maybe of most interest to this group is some interesting developments on the outcomes payment side of things. And the most important one I would call out is an opportunity that's come through the federal government called the Social Impact Partnerships to Pay for Results Act. Okay. Right. So this is an act that came out in the budget last year from Congress that sets aside $100 million in pay for success outcomes payments from the federal government. And they released a notice of funding availability about 3 weeks ago in the Federal Register, in which jurisdictions like Anchorage can apply for some degree of funding from the federal government to support their own pay for success projects. Of course, there are restrictions on exactly how large and what that kind of outcomes funding can look like, but we are working to try to fulfill all of the requirements laid out in that NOFA such that we can actually get access to a chunk of the first $66 million that they've opened up for that kind of a project. The last couple of things that I would call out is we continue to have conversations to see if, even in this climate, there may be room for the state to participate in this project as well. And we are also laying the groundwork for some of the contracts such that we can begin a pilot project beginning to house folks over the next few months here in Anchorage. Nancy, anything that I missed that I should call out? Right now, I'm trying to be brief. Yes.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that overview on Pay for Success. For the money that's been set aside with the HUD grant for positive outcomes payments, how does that work? For example, is that, I'm assuming that's the part where the muni and, lines up the investment, that's something to get used to. Lines up the investors, and depending on what metrics that have been agreed upon, and if those metrics are met, then the HUD money would be used to reimburse that cost in this scenario? Is that how that would work?
The HUD money, along with other chunks of potential outcomes payments, such as funding from the municipality, the state, this additional federal pool that we're trying to get access to, and potentially funding from other healthcare institutions that may see benefit from improved outcomes from homeless. That's exactly right.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. I don't see any other questions.
Hi, my name is Allison Ford. I'm the Executive Director of Covenant House, and I'm here to talk to you about the Youth HUD Demonstration Project. And just a little background on it. We were awarded this as a community in December of 2016. And we actually just signed contracts to begin our demonstration project in October of 2018. So where we are to date is that we're all 4 programs have hired and are actively working with young people in a different way in our community. So the 4 programs are the Anchorage Coalition is the applicant for the project. Covenant House is the lead. We have 2 of the projects, which are Permanent Navigators and Rapid Rehousing. And then we have CORE, Choosing Our Roots, and they are doing host homes for LGBTQ youth. And we have Volunteers of America that is opening up permanent supportive housing. So Jasmine's here. I think we have Julia. I think we have CORE is represented. We'll pretend, I think Sherry is here. If she's on, she's going to be here. But we're all here together, kind of united, as we talk to you about the things that we're doing to make a difference. And I also have Amy. Amy is a member of the Youth Task Force. And just a reminder that the Youth Task Force is actually, I tell them that they actually have more authority and more power than I do on the project. So they like to come and show up where I am so that they can let you guys know that they're my boss. So this is my boss right here. So anyway, the number of people served by Covenant House in the project is we have to date served 158 young people between the ages of 18 to 24. 49 of the clients are active in a roster to look for housing. The wonderful thing of this is 16% of that total have never been touched by Covenant House, meaning that we're working with them outside that system, trying to prevent them from even having one night of homelessness in our space. And we have 4 placements current to permanent housing via our permanent navigators, and we have 11 housing referrals that are actively in process. So you can see from our role, we have an amazing team of, it's about 7 additional staff to the Covenant House Alaska team, and we're actively working to change the way we work with young people in our community, that the experience of homelessness will be rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, right? And the update on CORE is that they are actively working with, I think, 10 host families that have been identified, and currently are working on 2 placements. So everybody is staffing, and we're really coming full board with this. And then Volunteers of America is in the final stages of the hiring of their clinical team. They have the biggest, I tell Sherry she has one of the biggest lifts, because this is also a service that has never existed in our community for young people, specifically targeted on permanent supportive housing. And so we're all working diligently to make this a community project. It's not any one of us as an agency, it's us as a community. So with that, Amy, if you want to give them any updates from the youth perspective on how we're doing, are we hitting the mark, or are we failing miserably?
So as Allison said, I'm Amy Kelly. I'm the research committee member for the Youth Task Force. So my big deal is that I control the numbers and I look at the numbers. From the youth perspective, I don't think we really know what's going on. Like from the YTF's perspective, we know completely. Like we're with you, and we think that everything that's going on here is great, but I think the youth in the programs have literally no idea what's going on. I hear constantly, because I live at Rites of Passage, literally across the street. If I stood up, I could see my room. That, they don't care. They're not working with us. They're just trying to get us out the door. And they see it as a big negative. There's this big negative connotation on the staff as a whole in all of the programs because of stigmatisms that we've grown up with. And I think that really what needs to be focused on now is opening up that door and making sure that they know that it's not a thing against them, that it's this thing that everyone's figuring out together, and it's to make it more about helping people get out of the situation they're in than be stuck in the cycle, because that's what we're all scared of, is to be constantly trapped in that cycle. But I think that what's going on here is fantastic, and I can't wait to see what else happens.
So you're not firing me?
No, I'm not firing. Not today.
So do we have any questions on the task force, the project? I mean, like Amy said, this is a new way of serving young people in our community, and we're trying to do it in such a way that they avoid being engaged in systems. And so with this, it's just a lot of work on educating you, our representatives, you that talk to different people. This is, it is innovative in Anchorage, but it's also innovative across the U.S. I mean, remember, it's 1 in 10 communities were selected for this. So we're leading the charge.
All right, so I don't see any questions, but I just want to quickly comment. Thank you, Amy, for being here today. And I just want to say, I think we're in the same battle with you. We definitely don't want to see a continued cycle. We want to look to the future and see how we can truly end homelessness as much as we can. So thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
maybe give Jasmine Khan just a minute to give a brief update from the coalition's perspective.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Very briefly, As everyone is aware, in Anchored Home Universe, we released 2019 priorities at the beginning of the year. As Nancy mentioned, we will be talking about this broadly and reporting Q1 outcomes on the plan in our April 9th meeting. But as a quick note, one of the core priorities for 2019 was housing additional people in rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. And while we heard about the 2 demonstration projects, there are also 2 rapid rehousing projects that have been moving for a number of years in some cases through private foundation support here locally and through a number of partnerships. So I do just want to call out that in 2019, through those 2 projects, through the Path to Independence, we've housed 8 new households. And the Providence supported rapid rehousing, we've supported 8 new families, new households end up in housing, and have all signs that those homes are going to be sustainable homes for those individuals. So other momentum in the community that's very positive. Again, more reporting to come that is inclusive of all of Q1. The other thing I just wanted to mention very briefly is if anyone's interested in the proposed state budget impacts on housing and homeless services here in Anchorage, that information is now available and updated on the ACEH website. But as we turn our attention to the conversation on camp abatement, I think it's very important to call out for the group that 6 out of the 8 large shelters in Anchorage would lose a significant amount of funding in the state proposed budget. And those would be 100% of the low barrier shelters that allow community members that sometimes cycle in and out of camps to have a safe space to stay at night. So I think that proposed budget has significant impact on the discussion today as well, and I just wanted to note that before we pursue this.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Next on the agenda is Rebecca Barker. She's serving now as our library social worker. And she's here to report on 6 months of a project that's a pilot and is a demonstration for the community in looking at places where people who are homeless tend to go during the day, and systems that are not necessarily geared to assist them in what they need. And so Rebecca is heading up this very exciting project.
Thank you very much, Nancy, and just hold it. Okay. Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. I'm so glad everyone's here. As Nancy said, my name is Rebecca Barker, and I work for the health department in this first-time, currently grant-funded program that started in September. So we're at 6 months right now. We got 1 year was our goal, was our progress, and so anyway, social work at public library. This is the first time it's been done here in Alaska, but it's not the first time it's been done. There's actually 50 programs like this all over the U.S. Most mid-sized and major cities have some sort of social work trained individual operating in their public library. And the question, of course, is like, well, why? But that's because people are already there. We know that there's folks who come to the library with all kinds of different questions, whether that's about, their family history or community information. It can also be their own housing or looking for a job or things like that. So my role is to really provide that information that isn't necessarily available on the stacks in the library from the librarians, because they're already getting those questions. They have been getting those questions for a long time. And that puts stress on them, because if they're dealing with somebody who's having a really bad mental health day, they don't necessarily have the training to handle that moment in a way that actually gives a good outcome for that patron. Let's see here. So the idea is to move interventions with folks who are having a really bad day upstream in services, so that they don't sort of bounce in the library, have a really bad day, and end up with APD or end up at API. The hope is that they can have a really bad day, and then somebody can intervene. I can talk to them, we can discuss, we can de-escalate. Maybe they're having a really bad blood sugar day because they don't have enough food. That's particularly common. So defining the community resource coordinator role, social work is a pretty broad field. A lot of social workers do a lot of different things. So if you look on your little sheet, the key word that's not on here to know about is in reach in social work. We talk about outreach, which is going out into the streets, out into agencies, reaching for new people.
Sorry, which sheet are you referring to?
Right, this one. It's the only one.
I don't think members have
We
a
don't
copy
do
of
that.
that.
We're about to get to that. Thank you, Chris.
The word's not on the sheet, well, sorry. The watchword is inReach. We're working with folks who are already spending their days at the library. They're already regulars. The librarians know them. I'm getting to know them. And the goal was to have individual sessions, individual confidential sessions with at least 300 individuals over the course of 12 months, from September to September. We're here in March and we're at well over 200. The need is very evident. And what those sessions are all about is also outlined here. The first thing people always ask for is job assistance. Sometimes I'll talk to somebody for 20 minutes before I find out that they are looking for a job and focusing on a job. And they've been living in their car. And they keep saying, no, I'm fine, I don't need help, I need a job. I need help, I need a job. So that's our number one. Underlying that is almost always housing. Some folks I speak to are housed, they have apartments, they're staying in family. A lot of folks are staying in cars, and a lot of them are staying in the woods, camping, and some are staying in shelters. More of the folks that I talk to are at the Mission than at BFS, but that's just a little breakdown. Food is an across-the-board need. Everyone at the libraries has, you never know it, but the food pantry calendars and things like that, they move very, very quickly. And then the last category is sort of the hodgepodge of wellness. Whether it's signing up for Medicaid, whether it's understanding where you can get dental work done with Medicaid, whether it's, what is the Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center, things like that. I've had people, and I did not believe that this was possible when I started, but people would walk up, I've never met them before, and they say, I need treatment. And so we just say, hi, okay, well, let's start that conversation. And so I'm able to use resources from other partner agencies who have put together sort of compendiums of resources and help walk that person through that. Because it's a really scary process. It takes a lot of courage to ask for help of any kind. It's very intimidating. So my job is to kind of bring those barriers down. In terms of methods of inReach, we have tried a number of different things over the last 6 months, sort of throwing things at the wall to see what works. What has worked most successfully in the last 3 months is a program called Housing Lab. Once a week, every Monday, folks can come into a workspace at the library where they have access to computers. I'm there, my intern, Jessica Calderell, who's amazing, is there. And 75% of the folks who come in are experiencing homelessness, 25% are not. We don't advertise it as homeless assistance, we say Housing Lab. And because nobody has just one problem in their life at a time, when people come in for housing, they often leave with food resources. They often leave with wellness and medical access resources, disability support resources, mental health support resources. We also have 2 additional patron-led programs. So this has only been as successful as it's been because of the partnerships that we've been able to have. The partnership between the library and the health department has been fundamental. It's great to have both those departments collaborating since they both work with, the benefit of the public in different ways. It's a natural overlap. Very significantly, I was very lucky to have the mobile intervention team reach out to me at the beginning of this project and offer their support. And as of course you're aware, they are the behavioral health crisis response team out in the community, responsible for much more de-escalation and diversion from emergency services than I am, because in the library we're of course bound by the library code of conduct, which sort of muddles that a little bit. But working together with them, having their expertise available has been invaluable, especially in the last week. Thanks, Tanya. Anyway, there's also been a lot of other really good community partnerships. SNAP outreach since the beginning. Anyone can walk into the library and get their SNAP benefits fixed. They can sign up, they can be certified. In 2 instances, we had folks who were regular recipients. They had gotten half their usual benefits after the government shutdown because there was a lot of confusion and paperwork. And because of the good relationship that I've gotten to have with the SNAP outreach folks, we were able to straighten that out so that they weren't really, really hungry by the end of the month, which in one of these cases was somebody who had a severe mental illness. And
just those fundamental wellness things we were able to correct before it became a mental health crisis. So moving that upstream. Had a great partnership with the Coalition to End Homelessness. It's been amazing. We've got the HRAC group meeting every other week at the library, which has been great. 211 Access Alaska Cook Inlet Housing Authority has been supporting Housing Lab by having their outreach person Patrick Muller come and visit us once a month and provide his expertise about their programming, because each of those agencies is very specific. Paperworks is their thing, you know, they collaborate, but they're specific. So to have that baseline level of knowledge at the library kind of rise up, hopefully make everything easier for people to access and navigate. And of course, the Mental Health Consumer Web has been a great support as well. We share a lot of the same visitors, a lot of the same clients. I don't know, that's important. The major takeaways, I don't know if these are really summary, but the need for permanent funding for this program, I think, is evident. I think there's two reasons. One is that the need is there, and so if the need is like, if this falls apart and then comes back, there's just that run-up time. You know, the first 3 months were a difficult run-up. It was a challenge, but, you know, so why not? The biggest barriers that people seem that I run into are experiencing, the first one's transportation. You know, they have the motivation, they have the desire to make these connections. It's just getting from one part of town to another, and having the resources to do that is a big barrier. Wait lists, it's hard for everybody, and communication has been a big barrier for folks as well. So we sort of bypass those barriers at the library by being there, because folks are already there. It's sort of a one-stop shop. They don't have to go all over town, and if they have a piece of information, there was an instance actually literally just yesterday, a gentleman who is highly mobile, very, very vulnerable. He's was someone who had an opportunity to connect with housing, but because of kind of the barriers that he experienced personally, it was really, really hard for him to make those appointments. And because he was at the library, we were able to get him that information. So it was just like, oh, hey, you know, haven't seen you in a bit, but just wanted to let you know you should call that one case manager of yours. There might be good news for you by the end of the day who's in that office. So I can't promise necessarily that this is like the be-all and end-all in solving, but it is an essential element of putting those things together and coordinating them. Next steps, really looking forward to working with staff more and security more. We're talking about over 100 individuals, so in each of their own departments, so it's been a really slow process of figuring out how everybody wants to get on the same page, but getting staff and security on the same page with the mobile intervention team and with crisis intervention team practices. And hopefully the continued, I think we've sort of initiated, but definitely formalizing and continuing the increase in the reduction of emergency service use, senior service.
Sure. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Should I use that?
Yeah, let's do that.
I just want to say thank you. This sounds incredible. I think it's such a good idea to be where people are and serve them in the many ways they need serving, and just really appreciate your work and your passion shines through, so thank you.
Very much, it's very much a team effort. This is some of the members of the team right here.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. A couple of things. First, it's great to hear that you're actually at the library because, you know, be where the people are. And my question is, what facility are you using in the library, and also what's the interaction with the library administration for your efforts? And then the second big question is, and I don't know if this is really Nancy or you, the question of when will we see the analytics for last year's kind of ramping up of the mobile intervention team focusing on certain hotspots so we can measure the success at pushing down calls for service and other high expense issues?
Hi, thank you. The first question was what facilities in the library are being used right now. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I started on the 4th floor in a corner office way, way away from everybody, but
through hard work and dedication, the staff moved me down to the second floor. I'm right next to the security office in a high traffic area now. It's a small office that was used for money counting back in the 80s, I think, and was used for janitorial services until I booted them out. Yeah, my intern and I share that office. We have a resource display in the front. I also travel to the Mountain View Library and use a little tiny little office in there. And then also to the Muldoon branch. I have those visits are having to sort of decrease because I'm getting spread too thin. But yeah, they've been great at finding physical space. Most of the resources come from my grant. So when I make printed copies or the huge number of flyers that I print out, that comes from my grant, not from EPL, and not usually sometimes from Health with their excellent generous support. But we've been trying to keep that balanced. Is that an answer to your question, Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, no, it's great. I thought this was the mobile intervention team conversation.
Oh, sorry, no, not quite. This is Rebecca Barker, Community Resource Coordinator over at the library.
Awesome, thank you.
Assemblymember Concept, this is Nancy. We have a schedule for review of some of the funded projects, and the mobile intervention team is on for May.
I've got a question for the research.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonson. Mr. Trainee.
Got a quick question for you. I get calls from people concerned about the safety of their children there at the library. Do you have a program that reaches out to these parents to assure them their kids are safe while they're in the library? Is that part of what you do?
That's a wonderful question. Right now, we've been focusing on serving folks who are experiencing homelessness and other vulnerabilities and haven't really gotten that bridge over to youth services. But I'm physically located right next to youth services. So it's a great question. There was when my office moved down, there was a great concern that somehow we would have a line out the door of vulnerable adults right next to these children. The fact of the matter is that the only people who end up screaming and crying outside of my office are the darling little ones. So the youth area has been remodeled. Since remodeled, there's a door. It's blocked off. It is really difficult for adults to go into the general area. The entire library is under camera. Those cameras are always monitored, and security response team is very, very quick to notice. Most of the time, they notice people sleeping, but they're very quick to get on that too, because you can't always tell whether somebody's actually sleeping. So I would say that the library is a very, very safe place. I don't think that, now again, I'm not a security task person. That might be a good question for if you need numbers and things like that. But I would say that if there's procedures in place for all staff, if there's any risk to children, if there's a missing child, usually they're just behind a shelf or something like that in the section. Yeah, I would say that the responses are very, very good in that team. So, but if there's more that you'd like to know about that and further develop, I'd love to talk to you and talk to those concerned parents about how to.
I guess I talk to security a lot, and I get a different story on what goes on at the library.
Okay.
So might want to have security come to us. Just tell us what transpires there, because they have a different perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I have a few questions. I want to echo Ms. Quinn Davidson. Thank you so much for your hard work on this. Just had a couple questions on some data and outcomes. So when was the end of your first 12 months?
So we are at 6 months right now. We started September 4th.
Okay, fantastic. So it sounds like you are going to be meeting that goal and going well over that goal. So that's good news. So of those 200 plus clients that you have served already, I know one of I assume one of the goals is to move them upstream or move them up the ladder. About how many of those folks that you've talked to are in that process of moving up the ladder?
I think that's a great question. In the process, I would say about 40% of the folks that I have any kind of exchange with are not housed. I would say that a number of those have moved into housing. I can't say that I can take credit for that, but their life has moved in a certain direction so that they're currently in housing. That may be temporary, maybe permanent. There's a couple of folks I know who were not service connected when I first met them, and one of them is currently, she's housed, but she experiences serious SMI. But she's after 6 months finally engaging with ACMHS. So
how many are on an upward spiral. I'd say everybody's on an upward spiral, but in terms of outcomes, I can give you a handful. I can say there's 2 evictions that we were part of connecting folks to those resources in the last month. So over the, I think I've talked to 40 some odd people this month, closer to 50. Those 2 evictions are not happening, which isn't great percentage-wise, but I think it made a difference to them. Is that, I'm sorry, yeah. Again, feel free to tell me to come back to you with better answers.
Sure. No, those are some good data points. I think having a few more data points, particularly when I get to my third question, would be helpful. And so just to clarify the goal and the outcome, it does sound like moving up the ladder looks for most individuals like finding them permanent housing, whatever form that takes.
Absolutely, yeah, it's foundational.
Great. And then lastly, you stated that your greatest need was permanent funding. What does that look like? Do you have a number attached to that?
So I currently don't, yeah. We could definitely get you in touch with the people who have better numbers.
Hi, I'm Natasha Pineda. I'm the director of the health department. So this is a grant from the Mental Health Trust Authority, and we're at the midpoint. And so it just depends. The funding to continue it would just depend on whether or not we want to resource more or less. So we know how much it will cost to continue to partner this way with the library. The health department and the library both don't have the resources to continue that project, but we will be working to advocate to other funders to continue it. We think it's an important program, and this first year really is figuring out what are the metrics, what can we track, what can we not track. Some things are going to be very difficult to track. However, we will be looking at whether or not it needs to be expanded, because the first part of the project, Rebecca was able to get out to a lot of different places and was managing quite a cadre of interns. However, that takes a lot of resources and time. So if we want more, that will cost more. If we want to maintain, we know what that will cost, but we don't have those resources ourselves now. We will continue those conversations.
Thank you. And so I assume that if you want to expand this program, if that need is shown, that something like the alcohol tax would be a revenue source for that?
I mean, it's certainly up to the assembly to determine that, but we would be, looking at what are the things that are the goals of the administration and the assembly, and what are the ways and the tools that the library and the health department can coordinate and recommend those things. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Chair. So for future success, you said you're spread too thin right now, right? And we all know funding is something that's necessary. Is there any other impediments? Is there any other needs that you would have?
So there's a lot of different models for the way that this has been done across the country. It's got a 10-year track record in some places. And the 2 that are longest and most successful, I think they have a lot of good published information, are Denver and San Francisco. And their social work professionals have stayed in those jobs for a long time. And they have transitioned to having what they call peer health navigators or peer system navigators. And that's folks who are formerly library patrons who were encountered by the social worker. Either they were using in the bathroom, some of them had been chronically experiencing houselessness. And they went through a training program. And now they work for that project, doing the outreach and reaching out to people. And there's just nothing more, with lived experience, you can actually make those outreach connections so much faster, so much more efficiently, and so much more meaningfully. So that is a direction that I think a lot of programs have taken that seems to have good outcomes and be a good, strong way to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, next on the agenda is Mr. Ashman is coming back from the Health Department to talk about the Alaska Safety Patrol and Alaska Safety Center, and then how these resources are being used to support more of the need in the community.
Thank you, and actually, the first thing I was going to talk about, and I did provide some handouts. One of the handouts looks like this. It was in the bottom of the packet, but I put it there. But on January 9th of this year, we, the municipality and department, the health department funded the emergency warming station because the number of individuals at the emergency shelter was exceeding 100 individuals. Last year during shelter operations, we never exceeded 100, but this year we are. So within after working with our partners, we were able to organize a warming station about within less than a week, I would say. It's currently located at the Anchorage Bus Transit Center. The hours of operation is from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. in the morning. The emergency warming station is activated when the temperature is expected to be 10 degrees or lower, as identified at the Merrifield webpage weather station. And the transit center, People Movers, also offered to provide free bus passes to the individuals going from the Brother Beans overflow shelter to the transit center and return in the morning for anybody that's being referred over there. I think that we've had 14 days temperatures under, I think it was 18 days where temperatures were under 10 degrees or under, and that's represented by the orange numbers, blue numbers on this graph. The high has been 52 on January 11th. The low is 18. The average has been about 31. And then the bottom line there, the orange line, is the number of people that are going to the warming station but stayed for 2 hours or less. We wanted to track that information to see what was going on there, and also to help the folks at the transit center manage their staff and their patrols within the community. So not too many folks that leave, and the folks that, what our contractor, Securitas, is our contractor for the emergency warming station. And what they're finding is that many of the people that are going to the warming station aren't the regulars over at Beans and Brother Francis. Some of the downtown folks are taking advantage of this. So that's the information I had there. And then, the gray numbers up on top is the census information on those 10 degrees days at at Beans emergency shelter. And by far, they've been full almost the entire time. Even regardless of what the temperatures, their census has been up there close to 100 most of the time this year.
Thank you, Mr. Ashman. 2 questions for you. Mr. Dunbar.
Mr. Ashman or Ms. Burke, if either of you know, how many, have we had any, and if so, how many outdoor exposure-related deaths this winter?
I don't have the answer.
We've had some, but I don't have the answer, then we can get that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question I've asked before. I think it's something worth tracking. I know it's always, there's a certain number every year. I'd like to know what that number is. I feel like that helps people conceptualize what we're doing here and why we're doing it. And it also might help us see the impact of our interventions as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Treen. Oh.
Does the rescue mission enter into this at all? Do you take people there to warm up? Or is their structure so different you can't use them? The one on Tudor Road.
That's a very good question, because we have been working with the rescue mission also, and they have been in capacity as have all of the other shelters. And now they have had, the rescue mission has had some beds available, but those beds, and I think there's a handful of beds, maybe it's 16, those beds are reserved for people that are in their program, so they leave some vacant, but they essentially, and I want to say 82% full the entire time. The other 18% is for their clients. So they're at capacity also.
Thank you.
Ms. Burke, did you have a response to one of the questions?
I wanted to say, I don't think these microphones are working.
Yeah, they're not.
I wanted to say.
Maybe I turned it off.
No, it's on. I think that the battery is doing. So I will try to project. How the numbers all fit together will be part of our next conversation, but I do want to put a little placeholder in that we've talked about getting to the point where we have dashboards and the data point that Assemblymember Dunbar mentioned, plus how full we are at shelter and some of the specific needs of each shelter. We're working on trying to present all of that information in one dashboard, and we've listed it in the community plan as by June as our timeline for that. So we will be testing drafts of that and getting input from members as we get closer to that date. But the Deaths Outdoors has been one that we do track. We've tracked it annually, and we'll ensure that it's in that dashboard.
Thank you.
Real quick, Steve, does the safety ambassadors for the Anchorage Downtown Partnership, do they help in the effort to get movement for these people that are found on the streets over the warming shelter?
Yes, I believe they do. I have not had any conversation with their executive director about it, but I do know that through our contractor Securitas that operates the Safety Center Safety Patrol. The ambassadors are calling several times as appropriate for anybody that is immune-rated public that needs to transfer over there, and they stay, and they typically stay with that individual until the Safety Patrol comes through. So there is good cooperation between the two organizations.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Mr. Ashburn, you can continue.
And then if we turn the slide over, the following graph is just the seasonal use of intakes per month for the Anchorage Safety Center. And I'll go over some statistics. Between 2015 and 2018 is the time period that I'm going to talk about changes. The Anchorage Safety Center responded to 16% less calls. In 2018, the Anchorage Safety Patrol responded to 24,392 calls in the communities. That resulted in 15,401 intakes to the safety center itself. That figure is down 31% from 2015. In 2015, there were 22,326 intakes, so the intakes are down. When I looked at the frequency of use in 2018, we always look at our top 200 and our top 50 clientele. When I looked at the top 200 is 7.3% of all of our clients, but they're 56% of the intakes. So those are the folks that we want to get and work with, and we have been, and there have been some successes. When I look at the top 50, they represent 1.6% of the total population of the safety center and are 25% of the intakes. So if we look at those top 200s and we can get them in housing and into treatment, we can really make a significant difference. And we have seen, and I think that's one of the reasons our numbers are down, because we have been able to get people into housing over the last few years because of some new funding opportunities and housing arrangements that have been made. And then the last thing I will say is how people arrived at the safety center. And this again is 2018. 82% of the 15,481 intakes, 82% was from the safety patrol van. 11% was from the Anchorage Police Department. That number is down also from previous years. 6% are walk-ins. And then 0%, but 50 individuals either had a taxi or somebody else dropped them off at the safety patrol. And that includes my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ashburn. I don't see any questions. So we'll go ahead and move on to the 2019 summer plan for camp outreach and abatement.
sure that folks can hear me because our microphones are being wonky. So we wanted to talk about the members of the community. Remember that in January we do our point in time count, and then there's a process of working with a number of different entities across the community. Our Homeless Coalition and the Institute for Community Alliances does the data working that needs to happen. They unduplicate numbers, and that process does take a number of months. The full report will be out in May. So I wanted to provide some historical information, and then I have one data point that is a preliminary data point that's the municipality helping to promote this data point so we can give you a little peek at it. But so this is our community homeless count, and it's I hear numbers in the community from people concerned about homeless numbers and how many people really are homeless in the community. And you can see from this chart, which is a historical 2013 to 18, that there are about 1,100, a little under 1,100 now, total members who are homeless. This is youth, this is children, this is families. And so it breaks out in some subcategories the way that you see it here. And you can really see that homelessness in Anchorage, much to the credit of the coalition and the service providers that we have really worked very hard over the last few years to make sure that we're making best use of resources in the community, and that number is holding steady. Of course, we don't know what this year's number is, but we have been in an economic time where other communities would have seen a rise in homelessness. So this is the work of the community that we believe we're doing better. We're making really good use of what's already in the system. We are ready for an infusion of funds because we will begin, like Steve said, some of the numbers that we see are really tied to housing opportunities for people in the community. So this is a one that we look at. This would be adults only who are 18 and over. And you can also see that there's been a few, there's been some movement in this chart, but from 2011 to 2018, we see that there's between 800 and 900 adults over 18 who are homeless in our community. And you see last year's numbers, which we've reviewed in this committee. There were about 633 people found in 613. My glasses are not really great now. 613 in shelter settings, 100 in transitional or temporary type housing, and about 94 people that we found outdoors, unsheltered during the house.
Before we continue, I have a question from Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was looking back at the first page, and I didn't see a category for veterans. Have we pretty much got all the homeless veterans in housing at this point?
The veteran system is making the most progress in our community, and it's not one of the breakouts that we reported, but I can absolutely get you that data, and it does. It looks very good. Last year in the outreach count, in that 94 people that we saw outdoors, there were, I think, 4 vets. So that system is really very far ahead of the rest of our population areas.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Go ahead, Ms. Berg.
So this is a look at the count for the last, will be 4 years. I'll populate these 2019 numbers as soon as they're available from our partners. But you can see that as we've increased a system to locate and accurately count people out in the community, we're using a system that observes people in the community instead of asking on a survey. We're not using self-report, whether you slept outside last night or not. We're using volunteers. You may have heard that this year we counted 95 people. That's a preliminary number. As we make sure that everything's unduplicated, that number could go up or down a little bit. But we counted 95 people outdoors, and we had 180 volunteers that showed up to help us do this. So we're still continuing to get very robust community support, and I believe that this data point is becoming something that we can rely on as a community. This is our shelter capacity. This question also gets asked, and I've been in some situations where I've only referenced some kinds of shelter and not others, so we're putting together the information so that it's readily available. This is the shelter capacity in summer versus winter. And so as you can see, we have more in winter. We've worked on building out that capacity. If you look at the slide that Steve Ashman showed us, there were days where we had 100 people in our overflow, emergency cold weather and overflow shelter setting, and then an additional 50 people in the warming station. So we still know that we're under on shelter to meet the need of what's happening in the community. But as we put those dashboards together that I spoke about, we'll balance that with how many housing opportunities are we able to pull people out of the system to get into housing, and what our true capacity for the today current problem will be something that we will manage and monitor over time. This was Mr. Ashman's slide, and that's where we're starting to look at, what are the edges of our capacity? Are we meeting the need, or how are we doing in the community? And then just as a reminder, the summer count is a separate process. We look at all shelter usage, and we look at everybody we can find, we can locate outdoors during the summer. And so we don't use it as a straight comparison to winter because HUD has a different protocol. But this is a separate data point that will give our community the ability to monitor how we're doing in summer opportunities for people to go to shelter. So if you see the blue column at the bottom, the first year we did it, we had lower shelter utilization. The second year, that number went up. We had higher people found in outdoor settings, and the second year, that number went down. So as we see shelter use go up and people coming from outdoors, that is a trend that we want to continue to see.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. I have a question from Mr. Gates.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. If you could go back this slide, I just have a question. You spoke non-profit hotel in Shelter World. How is that capacity measured? I think the evidence are based on how many beds are going to be at the shelter.
Thank you for that question. That's dependent on money that's available. That is a placeholder. That's a minimal number that I can confidently say exists in the community. That number can go up or down based on money that's available, funding that's available, and the main entity really driving that resource is Partners Reentry Center. They're doing tremendous work in helping people come from reenter community, from corrections, and using some of these temporary solutions. But we're able to count that as a shelter option, a temporary solution in the community.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
And then lastly, this is where we have taken the time, we've had enough time to really build out our ability to monitor capacity. And the camp abatement process is really connected in our community to monitoring capacity and the services needed to move people from camp locations to shelter, housing options, or reconnecting with family and other settings. And so this year you have a little bit of a snapshot of the systems that are being put in place on the upfront, what I describe as the people part of the process. And so we have a dashboard on the left, underneath the left arrow for shelter and housing. This is a live polling dashboard. It's still being set up. We're still having some glitches with the polling, with the calls that go out. But what it does is it calls every location that you see listed on the snapshot, and it asks them how many spaces are available in your shelter tonight. And then people are able to punch in the number of spaces on the phone, and then it comes back and it registers on a dashboard that looks just like this on the internet. And so we can monitor how we're doing in terms of capacity. We can also look at some of those shelters are generic, good, open space kinds of shelters. I don't want to say good in the way that's good, but they can serve a lot of people. And then some have restrictions on entrance, and we can't necessarily count them as a
core community capacity number, we have to think about our domestic violence shelter is a needed component, but it has very strict requirements for entry. And some of the settings on there have sobriety as a requirement for entrance. And so it's not necessarily just we can say we have these number of spaces open. We have to make sure that there's enough room for flow through in the community. So that will be coming soon. We're getting that a little more robust. We'll be able to give you some more examples of that in the future. The next thing is the legal notification schedule this year will be tied to the cleanup schedule. And so to the extent that we're able to clean up, we're giving legal notification to camps. This is important because it shapes the behavior of the people who are given a legal notice. If they're given a legal notice and nobody ever comes back and cleans the camp or works on the moving out of that location, then people have the message that they can just continue to do so. So to the extent that we have the cleanup resources, we're tying the legal notification schedule. In between the process when the police go out to a camp and the required waiting period, we're inserting the mobile outreach and the social service teams. The mobile outreach team is coordinating outreach for nonprofits who have that ability in the community. We have a software system called Vertical Change that they're able to enter information into. And this is an example of some of the data that we'll be able to pull out of that. For instance, how many people we saw this month, how many, if we've seen them before, how many times before, and some other basic demographic information. And then last, I just want to remind the committee that we have really 3 different processes that we'll use this summer. We'll use a standard 10-day notification process where camps will be notified. That can either be a camp that's across town and one that's in another part of town, or it can be camps that are in one series of locations. Like last year we did the Chester Creek Trail. We went east to west. The standard 10-day notification process was used in both of those examples. Then there is a zone abatement where we specifically and differently notice a cleanup for an entire area that's been heavily impacted. So last year we did this in Valley of the Moon. We placed notifications 50 feet apart. We had some requirements to store belongings of anyone who came in after that notification went up. We are able to store their belongings at, last year we used Solid Waste Services. We're having some conversations with them again about that. And so that zone abatement is a tool that can be used for heavily impacted areas. The last one is 72-hour abatement. We were also able to test that type of an action last year in places where there's I'm concerned about public safety, there's potential criminal activity. We can use 72-hour abatement now that we've tested this out. So that's the timelines and then the camp cleanup schedule. And well, Tina has a quick demonstration for us of the things we're standing up around camp cleanup schedule and then how the public might view what's happening.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Before I go on to questions, I just want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left. Normally, we might be able to extend a little bit, but we do have the Health Policy Committee meeting at 12:30, so I just want us to be mindful of that. I want to make sure we have time for audience participation. Mr. Dunbar.
2 quick questions. One, remind me, have we actually used the 72-hour abatement process yet? And I know it's a relatively new tool, and well, relatively new to start using it. And then for the storage, for 72-hour and for the zone abatement, how often have people actually come back and reclaimed their items? How often is that actually happening?
Well, we did it twice last year. So of that sample, there were a number of people who came back and wanted to help facilitate that. I mean, it was probably pretty active. I think.
Yeah, I'd say about 60% of people came back to retrieve their belongings.
And when you say come back, you mean go to, was it at the transfer station? So they'd be cleaned up in Valley of the Moon, and those folks would find a way to get to the transfer station, about half of them, and reclaim their goods?
Yeah, I provided them with towel how to get there, and the bus or whatever means they have. Most of them, when your arrived with the car or truck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Tina has a very quick, I've given her very strict directions.
Thank you.
I get excited about this. So we have set up a couple of public reporting dashboards, mocked them up, and we hope to get them live this summer at some point. Parks and Rec has been refining their camp cleanup process in terms of the data acquisition, and so the idea is that we can make this information available for the public on a regularly updated basis. It'll show total labor hours and number of pounds of trash removed for the parks process. We are also working on a similar dashboard for the police for the abatement process, so that there's a mechanism to be more transparent within the boundaries that we can be transparent with some of this data.
Okay. Thank you. And where can we find this?
So Parks and Rec will be launching it April 22nd. We are in a testing phase, and they have cleanup personnel. I don't know, John, if you want to say anything on that. They have cleanup personnel starting on the 22nd.
Yeah, just very quickly, we will have our first crew begin on April 22nd. Second half of the crew begins on May 8th. We have funding in place to continue the end of October. We've been engaged for the last 10 weeks. Various locations, dominating those are access to high profile visibility, Third, Carlet, Inglewood, corridor, and there. We are there at least once a week, sometimes.
Could you come up closer to the recorder? And could you speak up, please?
3 times a week. So currently, we've collected in the first 10 weeks 16 tons plus at multiple locations. But we all know we're going into the exposure period and with the resources, human resources. So we have about 4 weeks. We'll be ramped up and ready to go. And as I said, the first wave starts April 22nd. May 8th, the second wave, we will operate 6 days a week with those crews, and we will follow the strategies that Nancy outlined, depending on the circumstances, whether it's 10-day zone or 72 hours.
And these dashboards are just a small component of the larger puzzle that Nancy's been putting together for the overall dashboards. They're very specific to her workflow.
All right. Thank you. All right. So just 3 quick comments on that last part of the presentation. So before we move to audience participation, so this slide that has the current capacity, I know, Ms. Burke, you've been really good at trying to get us numbers about the need, which is most relevant during the winter. If you could either come up with another slide or overlay need on the current capacity, I think that would be helpful for us to get a broader picture. I'm talking about this slide. And then when do you think the assembly will be able to review the data, the final data on the point in time? In May? Great, thank you. And then I just want to comment that the back end of the system is looking good. It's looking like we're making some really good enhancements to increase the transparency and the effectiveness on the back end. My question was specifically regarding to human resources and how, if those resources were being added onto, and Mr. Otto was able to comment on those human resources. Sounds like we have funding through October. Okay, so those were my only comments on that part of the presentation. Do any of my colleagues have anything before we turn it over to audience participation? All right, so we have time for maybe 2 or 3 individuals. So if you're really yearning to speak. Yes, Ms. Rhodes.
Well, Mr. Rivera, I did send you a letter 10 days ago asking that you would add to the agenda for today the 2019 camp cleanup, projection, as well as an update on the 12-point plan, which you had taken up at the end of last summer. Citizens are here today. Here is the photographs I took of the 2018 Chester Creek. and here's yesterday. They are virtually identical. And while the numbers may be different, we don't really know, because the data that we've heard today is really not helpful, to be honest. If we can't get a point-in-time count from the middle of January to come to us until May, it simply doesn't inform what it is that you have to do in order to address the problems that we have in the camps. The camps are filthy. They're worse than they ever were. They're huge. They are multiplexes. They're not one single thing. I want to compliment all of the work that the municipality did last year and the Assembly. You have come very far ahead. You now have a comprehensive strategy. You have zone abatements in place. You have finally committed to property inventory and storage, which took years and years. The thing you need in order to, the third prong to legally abate, is you have to have capacity for shelter. You have to be ready, willing, and able to shepherd people who are living in our parks in filth into our shelters. The shelters are the place that have the ability to shepherd people, as you call it, upstream. That's where your case managers are. That's where your coordinated entry system is. It is not in the camps. People who go to the camps and hand out cards, that may be helpful, but the people who are in camps have chosen the camps as the shelter alternative. And so we must have sufficient shelter space to legally return them to shelter space. And we cannot tolerate the public health and safety risk to them or the public health and safety risk to us. One of the photos there is of a gentleman who, when my husband and I came walking through our public park, asked us, "What are you doing near my house?" and pulled out what looks to me to be a 6-inch blade and stuck it in a tree. So I'm just telling you that the community really is watching. We're back. You told us you were shutting down the program for the winter, but we have very few months here. The municipality's responsibility is for Pillar 3. We got 10 minutes on Pillar 3 today. Homeless supports and services, that is other responsibility. So we need to hear in every single one of these meetings an equal time for Pillar 3. In addition to which, the last meeting you had a month ago, the question of how many fatalities there were in the camps was asked. I heard it. It was unaddressed again today. Data is not going to direct what we need done as a community in this area. We have prioritized housing for youth. Youth are the same number as,
Ms. Rhodes,
I'll wrap up.
Thank you.
Youth are the same number as unsheltered. So I see that we are not prioritizing this population in some because they're not pretty. They're not our happy population that we want to house, but we have to get them out of our camps and into a bed.
Thank you, Ms. Rhodes. All right, Ms. Chase.
Thank you. Well, what I've heard here today is we have increased people in the nonprofit area working on the same old problems that we've been discussing for several years. And as far as the data is concerned, I have to agree with Stephanie Rhodes that it's a whitewash. It's not transparent. It's not getting us to the actual numbers. I don't care how many tons of trash. That tells me nothing. Okay, the other thing is, we're a small community. We have the opportunity to do things right. I was just in Seattle yesterday. It's a mess. And there's a program on YouTube, and I suggest everyone take a look at it. It's called Seattle is Dying. It's called KOMO. K-O-M-O. It was a news program. And it will show you what's going to happen if we continue to take away the rights of people who are making choices. The main thing that I don't hear in all of these wonderful discussions about how much has been accomplished and how much needs to be accomplished is whose responsibility is it that that person is in an encampment. And I understand, oh, it's a complicated, that word should not be used in this situation. Complicated is outdated. what we want is we want people who want to do something different. That's who we deal with. That's who we take care of. Until a person makes a decision, they want something different. I don't care what we do, how much money we spend, it's not going to make a difference. So we can continue to spend money, and I can tell you right now, the governor's budget is going to make an impact here, because money doesn't solve everything. But I encourage all of you to take a look at that program. It will scare you to death, because we can become that. Our little town of Anchorage, 340,000 people.
Thank you, Ms. Chase. All right, Mr. Oliva, and then I'm going to have to wrap that up.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera, and I want to go on record that I requested to get on the agenda for 5 months, and you've denied me that opportunity. I'd like to commend Ms. Chase. Watch the chemo. Seattle's dying. Anchorage is on that road, and in fact ahead of them. The idea of spending $3.8 million on a pedestrian upgrade from Ingram Street to Post Road is insane. And I'll send you photographs for the reason why, along with the Alaska Trucking Association. I'm asking for documentation for all homeless funds from the municipality and their allocations and budgets, especially to nonprofits. And I want the nonprofits to come forward and show us their budgets and their salaries. I don't think there's efficient uses of the funds. Also, I want you to read Bill Gates' idea with his jar of fecal material and what he has done worldwide. In third world countries spend $200 million, because that's the #1 spreader and cause of death in third world countries. And they don't have to go to third world countries, they can go to Third and Carlin. And I request the health department to go down there and follow San Francisco and San Diego and Seattle in the disinfectant of those camp areas. Kids' lunchbox is right 200 feet away. That fecal material being walked into those facilities inadvertently or even intentionally is causing a great threat. I asked you to all go down there and sample their meals. And if I asked how many of you did and taken a meal home and fed it to your kids, hey, you wonder why Providence Hospital is overburdened with health issues, because people are getting sick because of that gross sanitation.
If you could wrap it up, Mr. Oliva.
I'll wrap it up.
Thank you.
I've called the governor's office and I've asked for support. It's called HAM, Homeless Abatement Militia. If the governor can send the National Guard to our southern border, they can send it to our parklands, our bike paths, and hey, monitor cleaning up that garbage, if not at least map it. So, being Italian, I want to tell you one last thing. We speak with our hands. I'm an auctioneer, I speak loud, and I'm deaf in one ear. And unfortunately, Mr. Gates took away my one thought to you guys was, I'm speaking to deaf ears, because he's the only one listening.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva. Insightful comments. So with that, I will just quickly state before I adjourn that likely in April we'll be having a special meeting to discuss our 2019, to further discuss our 2019 camp abatement and outreach plan. There's more to discuss, and we will have that meeting and we'll notify you guys adequately. Thank you.